Action research is a methodology within a critical approach to research, meaning that it focuses on social change. So it is centered on problem solution using reflective processes to think about how we might solve problems that lead to positive social change. It involves people working together, often at organizational levels or in communities. And in the words of Kemison McTaggart, the intent is to improve the rationality and justice of our practices, to learn how to frame and address issues, and to solve problems. Action research is characterized by this research spiral, and there are two levels at which we can make sense of this. The first is that at the macro level, where we see multiple action research spirals ongoing. The idea is that at any one period of time, cycle one and stage one, there's a concern about problem solution that leads to some kind of change, which inevitably leads us to rethinking and re engaging within that context around what problems are important, and that leads to subsequent cycles within this action research spiral. And so, in essence, this spiral goes on potentially indefinitely. We can also look at the action research spiral in a micro sense. So, within one cycle, we begin by engaging within a very specific context and trying to identify what a problem or issue is, collecting data about that, planning for change, reflecting on that change, and then the re engagement. Action research is notably these three C's: collective, collaborative, and critical. That's one of the things that indicates its situatedness within the critical theoretical perspective. This is in contrast to something that's occasionally mistaken for action research, and that's reflective practice. Those two things are not the same. All good professionals engage in reflection on their own individual practice. They think about what to do in order to make it better. This is true for teachers or lawyers or plumbers. Anyone who is engaged in some kind of practice will necessarily individually think about how well they're doing what they're doing and thus engage in reflective practice. That's a good thing. It's not action research. So again, the procedures within action research are entailed in this spiral. So the identification of a problem, which is a collective responsibility. It's not something that's done by a researcher or by one person. It needs to be understood within a context in this collective way. That problem may need to be redefined. Part of that redefinition comes from collecting evidence to help think about what the problem is and then to make a plan. There can be all kinds of different data collection methods that are used in these early stages in terms of action research. There are no particular privileged methods. So then the idea is to plan for how to solve the problem and enact that problem, enact the plan, and then engage in reflection on the success or the extent to which the problem has been mitigated, and again begin a new action research cycle. So another frame of thinking about this is what is called look, think, act. It's exactly the same kind of idea, just narrowed down a little bit more. What's really important for action research is having good problems. Sometimes when we begin action research, what we think is the problem evolves as we think about it, as we learn more about it. But good problems are important and complex. They are not simple, they're multifaceted, they're not easily solved, or they wouldn't require action research. They are problems that demand some kind of action in order to create the change that we want, and they challenge the status quo. So frequently, problems get reframed as we're in the process of doing action research. And this is in part to encourage what's called double loop learning. That is, learning that leads to systemic change. This is in contrast with single loop learning, which may solve the problem at the moment, but the problem simply occurs the next cycle around. Nothing systemically has changed in order to alleviate the problem. So there are a number of people who are associated with action research. Kurt Lewin is oftentimes called the father of action research and coined the term in 1946. His particular work focused on intergroup relationships, looking at geographical and political groupings of people and social problems that were related to those. Donald Schoen, an organizational development type, has written a lot about reflective practice, and the two ideas that he contributes to action research are this notion of a learning organization, that is, action research can be built into organizational structures so that organizations continue to learn to be better. And he's the one who distinguished between the single and double loop learning that I just mentioned previously. Paulo Freire's work on community participatory action research is absolutely central to our understandings of what action research is and how to do it. He worked in education, seeing education as core to social change, and so the notions of critical pedagogy have been developed through his work. It's this critical reflection that people can use in relation to their own lived experience that for Freire gave us hopefulness in terms of social change. And then Kemmis and McTaggart are most commonly associated with action research in education. Their work on teachers as researchers is again about improvement of professional practice in a large way, not necessarily in an individual way, thus centering on structural and organizational change within education. If you're interested in learning more about action research, these are three good resources to start with. Certainly, Freire's work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is kind of a Bible for action research. The Sage Encyclopedia of Action Research, and there are others as well. And then Kemmis and McTaggart's most recent edition of the Action Research Planner is a very pragmatic, how to do it kind of resource for action research.